As all of us know, and as all of you continuously promote, rigor and ethics in science is absolutely critical. So essentially, the reason why I've chosen to give this talk is because all of you promote science, uphold science, and therefore what I felt is that this talk is important because if science isn't rigorous, it's reckless science, and we do not want to promote reckless science at all. There are two cornerstones of scientific advancement, and these are: one needs to design studies in science, and that design of studies needs to be rigorous. So the rigor in designing and performing scientific research is critical. That's one of the major cornerstones of scientific research. And if that is done well, then of course research findings from one study can be reproduced by other people. And if the study isn't designed well, the data are not generated well, the data are not analyzed with rigor, then of course what's going to happen is that the results of that study cannot be reproduced by other scientists. And one of the hallmarks of science is the ability to reproduce scientific results of one study into another, because generalizability of results of science is of paramount importance. And unless scientific results are generalizable, there is something wrong with respect to those kinds of results and inferences. And that can be done only if the study is designed rigorously, the data are generated with rigor, and the analysis is done rigorously. So these are three important parameters of success of science in terms of generalizability of results of scientific research. So this application of rigor actually ensures that robust and unbiased experimental design needs to be followed. The methodology, analysis, interpretation, and reporting of results, all of these need to follow a particular rigorous style, and that rigor is absolutely important and critical in science. As I said, that rigor in science ensures that scientific results and inferences can be validated and generalized. Many of these thoughts are not my own. Many of these thoughts have been culled from reading the literature. In particular, a discussion with Francis Collins, who was up until recently the director of the National Institutes of Health in the United States, that culminated in crystallization of these ideas, and therefore I'm grateful to the people who actually wrote these various facets of rigor and my discussion with Francis. Can I have the next slide? Unfortunately, what has happened is that in recent times, because of lack of rigor in science, because we have compromised with rigor and ethics in science, published papers, scientific results are published in journals, as you know, and these papers are getting retracted for two reasons. Either people are able to catch manipulation and duplication of various data or images, and also copying of results from others or from your own previous publication. So there has been a compromise of rigor and ethics of science, as a result of which papers are being retracted and manipulation of papers are being caught red-handed. So as you can see in this particular slide, and I'm actually not presenting you or divulging the name of the institution, it is from an Indian institution, it is from a specific scientist who's has a large number of publications, but 28 of those publications from this particular scientist who belongs to a specific institute in India, it was detected that the results have been manipulated because images have been duplicated. And image duplication is something that's unethical, should not be done in science, but this scientist has done so and has been caught. There's also a chemistry researcher who studies oil wells, and that scientist, has retracted seven of the published papers, seven of the papers that he has published. And the reason for retraction is that once you get caught, for having manipulated your data or images or results, then the journal that has published that particular paper will actually get back to the author saying that either justify or retract your paper, because unless the paper is retracted, somebody else will use those results and draw inferences, and somebody else will try to replicate those results and will fail, etc. So we don't want other people, other scientists to waste their time, and we don't want wrong inferences to percolate in the society. And therefore, there is a huge pressure from other scientists and the journal to retract those papers, and usually those papers are retracted by the scientist who has published the paper, and because the scientists have not been able to justify all of the steps that were used in order to draw these inferences. Then again, I'm not giving you divulging the name of the institution. Papers published between 2004 and 2017, of the papers that were published from this institution, 73 of those papers were flagged for lack of rigor, but more importantly for use of unethical methods in order to publish those papers. And therefore, these papers eventually were declared to have a very serious problem. It's not a small number. 73 of the papers in a period of about 15 years is a large number of papers to be flagged as problematic papers. Now, obviously, these things we want to avoid, and these kinds of things can be avoided if we follow some of the rigorous methods of science and the ethical methods that we need to use in science. These are done in two ways. As a scientist, I convince myself that these are the methods that I should follow. So I try and implement that at an individual level. And then at the next level, at the next higher level, there is the community of scientists. The community of scientists can belong to the institution in which I work. The community of scientists can belong, in the larger scheme of things. And therefore, the second level, the second higher level of implementing or imposing that we should follow rigorous and ethical practices comes from our peers, wherever they belong. So at the individual level, if we look at investigator-driven scientific research, it starts with the investigator. That's the second. That's a second circle that's provided, which starts with the investigator. The investigator sets up a hypothesis, then collects data in order to be able to test the hypothesis. So at the time of collection of data, to test the hypothesis, you need to follow rigorous methods of how you want to collect the data, what should be the framework under which you collect data, and then you use rigorous methods in order to test the hypothesis that you set out to test, and you want to get all of this right. And because you want to get all of this right, you need to follow these rigorous methods and ethical strategies in order to test that particular hypothesis and draw the appropriate inference for that specific hypothesis. Once you get it right, then you want to go back and start formulating another hypothesis, and you want to get that right too. So a rigorous and ethical investigator can spend her or his own life doing these various kinds of things in exactly the same way. And we believe that if an investigator imposes it upon herself or himself that rigor and ethics in science is of paramount importance, then I probably wouldn't have to stand here and give this talk, and we wouldn't have to hear, reports that 73 papers have been retracted in a period of 15 years, published by scientists from one specific Indian institution. So there are indications that we are actually slipping in terms of upholding rigor and ethics in science. This is at the individual level, where an individual investigator convinces herself or himself that rigor and ethics is important, and therefore can spend a lifetime doing good science. Then at this higher level, as I said, there is a peer group that actually imposes on scientific rigor, and we call this as community-driven scientific rigor. at the front end, the initial project design will go through a peer review. So I'm thinking of testing a hypothesis or solving a problem. I set out a methodology and I pass it on to other people, asking them whether this methodology is or is not correct. So a whole community of scientists is looking at the methodology that I'm proposing to adopt, and if I'm slipping on rigor and if I'm slipping on other kinds of issues, scientific issues, that will impinge on my inferences, then the community will warn us that this is not appropriate, you need to do something else. You need to mend your ways or you need to change your modalities in order to be able to solve that scientific problem. Then at the time of performing, in the middle end of the run, at the time of performing experiments in the laboratory to generate data, this is usually an investigator's lab, so the investigator is in charge. But at the same time, sometimes as experimental scientists, we invite experts from other institutions or even other countries to come and review whether the methodology that we are following, whether the experimental setup that we are following is appropriate or not. So even in the middle run, even though it is primarily investigator driven, sometimes we invite other people such that it becomes a community effort, and the rigorous practices of science are then becomes community driven. Finally, after we have done the experiments, generated our data, analyzed our data, now is the time to publish our results. So we write down these whatever inferences that we have drawn, our own results, send it to a journal. Once we send it to a journal, the journal will not immediately publish it. They will send the paper to whatever we have written up. That includes the problem, that includes the hypotheses, that includes the methodology, that includes the data generation, that includes the analysis, the modalities of analysis, and finally the results. All of that is enshrined in the publication, in the paper that we have written, that we want published in a scientific journal. So what they will do is they will not publish it immediately. They will send it to a group of people who are also scientists who work in the same domain. And if they say that this has been done, this work has been done with rigor, and they don't immediately find any compromise with ethical practices, they will suggest to the editor of the journal, go ahead and publish. So essentially this is also community driven, where the rigor and the ethics are being overseen by a community of scientists. So this is at a higher level, not at the individual level, but at a higher level, and this is how science is practiced. Finally, after the paper gets published, everybody in the world is able to look at that paper. Some people will get attracted and say that, oh, this is very interesting result. Can we try and replicate it in our own lab? So this whole process of being able to replicate results begins after the publication of the paper in the journal. And if people are able to replicate, then of course those set of results become generalizable. But if it's not replicable, then people will go back and try to investigate why are we not able to replicate. And sometimes, I hope that it is not often, sometimes what one finds is that the reason for the inability of other people not to be able to replicate is because the investigator has indulged in some unfair practices, either in terms of non-rigorous methodology or, more importantly, has compromised on some ethical issues. What I've tried to do, again, this is from the literature, from my own thoughts, that I've tried to categorize these various kinds of compromise with rigorous science and with ethical science, from very harmful, something that's very harmful, some practices that are very harmful, to something that where the results can be independently repeated, and therefore that's good science. So in the highest at the highest level, or shall we call it the lowest level, because this is something that one should not practice. It's an insidious level. It's very harmful. The scientist purposely engages in falsifying data from initial grant writing. So we need to write a proposal, etc., get funds that's called grant writing, from initial grant writing to publication. So you purposely engage in falsifying data, which is of course completely unethical in science. So you engage in unethical practices and eventually publish results that have been obtained through completely non-rigorous and completely unethical means. And that's probably the lowest level, that's probably the largest harm that one can do to science and scientists. And that is the lowest level of conduct or highest level of scientific misconduct, which is possibly criminal, should be classified as criminal. No scientist should actually indulge or engage in falsification of data and such other unethical means. The second is scientists sometimes are creative and they make up such methods that are creatively harmful. So they deliberately avoid rigor in scientific practice and shows that provide the best results. So in scientific practice, whatever results you get out of an experiment, you need to analyze all of the results. There are people who will pick and choose results, so you get you take those results that best support your hypothesis and throw away results that do not support your hypothesis. This is not science. This is not the method of science. The method of science says that you need to take all of the data that you have generated and analyze them together. You don't select a subset of the data that actually substantiates your hypothesis or is in line with your hypothesis and only analyze that and present the results. So you cherry pick the data, as we call it in English, cherry picking the data, pick up a subset of the data that best suits your purpose. So this is harmful, but it's creatively harmful because the investigator is actually figuring out which portions of the data actually supports her or his hypothesis. These kinds of results, where cherry-picked data have been analyzed and results have been published, have no chance of reproducibility. When somebody else tries to reproduce these results, they will not be able to do it because they will get a mixture of data that will support the hypothesis and another that will not support the hypothesis. So the chance of reproducibility will be low. The third category of scientists are those who are careless. The scientists will apply rigor only when necessary or if somebody else asks them to be rigorous on that particular count. I can give many examples. One is in biological experiment, one uses what are called cell lines, and these cell lines can be, there are a variety of cell lines. So you just pick one cell line that's probably inappropriate for your experiment, and then you adopt non-rigorous methods. So somebody else points out that this is not rigorous, and then you go back and mend your ways, so to say. So you're a careless scientist. So these kinds of results by careless scientists will have a modest chance. Sometimes they will be reproducible, sometimes they will not be reproducible. So there will be modest chance of reproducibility. The fifth category or the fourth category are those scientists who are selective in the sense that they will apply rigor where experience dictates it necessary. So these scientists are quite intelligent people. They would have studied previous publications and will apply rigorous methods only when it is required at that particular stage of the experimentation or of the analysis. So those kinds of results have a good chance of reproducibility, but again, that's not completely appropriate because you are compromising on rigor. The fifth creed of scientists are those who are careful, and these are good scientists, apply rigor very well from the beginning till the end, and those results, those inferences will have a high chance of reproducibility. And enduring scientists, actually will not start to publish results based on one set of experiments. They themselves will ask themselves, can I repeat those experiments in my lab? So they will repeat the same set of experiments multiple times, and if the results are consistent, if the results are homogeneous and uniform, only then they will go back to publish. This is really good science, and then the results become reproducible. So on the one hand, we have harmful scientists who actually compromise on various kinds of ethical and processes of rigor. And on the other hand, on the other extreme, we have those scientists who are not happy just to be able to produce some results. They want to reproduce these results in their own lab, and until they are convinced that the results are reproducible in their own hands, they will not even go to publish it. And so these are the two extreme spectrum of scientists, scientists who are mischievous and scientists who are extremely careful. Why are scientists mischievous? We'll come to that in a moment. But before that, I do want to point out two things. Number one, this is not just India. It doesn't happen only in India. It happens throughout the world. I gave you examples of Indian institutions and scientists from Indian institutions retracting their papers, having some other people pointing out that they have adopted unfair means, etc. But this also has happened. It happened in a big way during the COVID times. During the COVID times, there were no vaccines to begin with, and there were no medication to protect ourselves. And so, very rapidly, in the best of journals, the Lancet is one of the best journals in medicine, in public health and medicine, where, for example, somebody proposed that hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine will protect you against COVID-19. So that they proposed as a treatment for COVID-19 did not follow rigorous procedures, not even sure that they actually were unethical, but for sure they did not follow rigorous procedures, as a result of which ultimately the data were shown to be false and the paper had to be retracted. And the paper had to be retracted from one of the best journals in the field of medicine and public health, the Lancet. The second paper also comes from another big journal where this was also published in Lancet and other journals, where it was said that if you take vaccines, and this is a particular vaccine against measles, mumps, measles, and rubella, it's called MMR vaccine. Many of us would have taken that vaccine. Many people here would have taken that vaccine, MMR vaccine. It's given at, I forget how long after birth, but soon after birth it's given. This particular type of vaccine is given. Somebody, and his name is Andy Wakefield, he published a paper, analyzed a large set of data, and linked the administration of this vaccine that protects a child against mumps, measles, and rubella. So he pointed out that those those children who have gotten this particular vaccine are predisposed to autism when they grow up. Now, this was accepted by the community, but again, as more and more data accumulate, people tend to look at that kind of data, and people question whether indeed the vaccine actually predisposes a child when they grow up to autism. And it was found that again the data were manipulated, the data were not analyzed properly. So 12 years after the study was published, the paper was actually retracted. So it's nice that people are looking at results, especially results that are of public health importance. People are looking at those results, asking whether the original set of results have been good, and if they are not generalizable, this is what happens to the fate of a paper even after 12 years of publication. Incidentally, this whole issue is now being again raked up under the new administration in the US government. I'm not going to get into details of it, so there are people questioning whether this retraction was correct or wrong. If you look at in the recent past, and this is a paper that was published in Nature in 2023, so just about 2 years ago. In the year 2023, more than 10,000 research papers were retracted, and this set a new record. 10,000 research papers retracted in a single year. And as you can see in the graph on the right, there is of course a steady rise in the number of papers retracted. Of course, this is highly correlated with the total number of papers published. So the proportion of papers that are retracted may not actually be high. But with 10,000 papers retracted in a single year, this is a major cause of concern. And if we look at the retractions, Of course, and so on the x-axis, you find this the year of publication. So that's from 2000 till 2020. And if you look at the middle range, so around 2006, India started to jump in terms of proportion of retracted papers. So you will see the red dots that belong to India or Indian scientists. The nature of the proportion of retracted papers increased suddenly from 2006. Of course, China has led in terms of the number of retractions, but their number of retractions is coming down. Our number of retractions is also coming down, and that's a good thing to see happen. But we still exceed countries like the US. The US produces the largest number of papers. I may be wrong. China may be producing the largest number of papers now, but up until recently, USA used to be the one single country that produced the largest number of scientific publications. Their proportion of retractions is now lower than India's proportion of retractions, which is a major cause of concern. So essentially, even though after 2006, the proportion of retractions of papers from India has decreased, yet it's still too high for it to be scientifically acceptable. Scientifically acceptable, I mean that there will be some black sheep. We hope that there will be no black sheep in our community, but there always are some black sheep who will indulge in non-rigorous methods, indulge in unethical practices, and therefore there will be some retractions, but it's still not low enough. So that essentially means that we in India, as a group of Indian scientists, are still not pursuing rigor and ethics in science, and therefore that's an alarming situation for all of us. Even though the rate of the proportion of retractions have decreased over the years since 2006, but still it's not low enough for us to rest and not think about this as a major problem. What are these causes of retractions? One major cause is that there are major predatory journals. So there are journals who will publish your paper almost without any peer review. As I said, that it's community-driven ethics and community-driven rigor oftentimes plays in. And there are now journals because publication of journals is big business now. You can earn a lot of money by publishing journals, and of course, in terms of publication of journals, you need papers to come into the journal, and these predatory journals will actually compromise on peer review. They will not send out the paper or send out the paper to soft people who will recommend publication, so easily your papers are published. So now if three scientists see that their papers have been published easily without any major problems, they will propagate this, and so it will snowball into more and more scientists submitting papers to these predatory journals. The predatory journals will thrive. Scientists will have more and more of their papers published without proper ethical and rigorous reviews, and so that's one major common cause. So things will slip into the scientific literature. Eventually, somebody will catch you that you have duplicated an image or not indulged in proper scientific rigorous practice, and there'll be then there'll be retraction. So that's one major cause of retraction. And because of this, there's a lot of data fabrication, falsification of data. Also, you plagiarize, you draw results from somebody else and publish as your own, or you replicate your own publication in another publication and publish that copied paper from your own as a new paper, and so on and so forth. Today, of course, artificial intelligence has come in. Artificial intelligence is able to manipulate images, change images, etc. So you can misuse the artificial intelligence tools in a way that benefits you, makes the paper look plausible, or the data actually plausible, when in fact you haven't even generated any data, when all of the data have been generated in a simulated way by an artificial intelligence tool. You can manipulate peer reviewers. A journal sends it out to a peer reviewer, usually in a confidential fashion, but still you can get to know who is your reviewer, and you can manipulate that reviewer into accepting your publication. There are also other issues like conflict of interest, authorship misrepresentation, etc., that are all ethical issues. So these are common causes of retraction. Let me spend the next few minutes trying to analyze what's happening in India. Because we can talk about a global scale, but after all, we are doing science in India. Many of you are doing science in India or would be doing science in Indian institutions. So it's important for us to be able to analyze the data that have been generated from India. And this is a systematic review of retractions in biomedical research. These kinds of activities must also happen in other domains of science in India. This doesn't concern physics, for example. This is only biomedical research. This doesn't concern chemistry, for example. This is only biomedical research. But even though the results that have been obtained in this particular study are instructive, and so I will point that out. On the right hand side are reasons for retraction. It's probably not readable, so let me read out the major reasons for retraction. And this is based on actual data on retractions. Why were these papers retracted? And the authors of this specific article, they have analyzed the causes and they have come to some conclusions, and I want to share those conclusions with you. Major reasons for plagiarism. 27% of the papers were retracted because of plagiarism. Either you copied from papers published by others, or you have republished your own work as a new work. So you have duplicated your own work in two different publications, and you're stating that these two publications are two independent publications when actually they are not. So plagiarism is a major problem, and that's definitely an ethical issue because you don't copy other people's work and say that it's your own work. So that's unethical. Similarly, you don't repeat your own work and say, or just copy your own work and publish the paper as an independent article. That's unethical. So copied text of the 27% of retractions that were due to plagiarism, the most important factor was copied text. So you copy paragraphs, pages from other people's work and publish that as your own, and that's plagiarism. And about 67% of these retracted papers because of plagiarism were because of copied text. Data issues, falsification and fabrication. Data issues were in 27.5% of the retractions, and within that class of data issues, falsification and fabrication of data were 1 quarter of those papers where there were data issues were because of falsification and fabrication of your data. Completely unethical. You don't falsify the data. You don't fabricate the data. That's almost criminal, like I said in the beginning. Duplicate publication. So you published a paper, and then you repeat that same paper in a different journal and claim that to be an independent paper, and that's duplicate publication. Complete articles. Either you can duplicate the publication in whole or in part. Complete articles have been 30% of papers that this duplicate publication has been identified. 30% of those papers were actually complete article duplications. So I published this article, I just changed the title perhaps, and I sent this to another journal, and it's published as an independent article. So the same article has been put in the scientific literature 2 times, which is not something that one would expect a scientist to do. So these are the major problems, and you can see that the percentages are not something that's in single digits. All of these percentages are in the 20s, and therefore there is no cause for us to say that rigor and ethics are not a problem in science in India. It is a major problem of science in India. Again, very recently there have been two publications, one in Times of India and the other in the Hindu, where again this exactly the same thing that I said have been said. This is a paper by an article by V. Ramagopal Rao. V. Ramagopal Rao was in the science administration of the government of India for a very long time. Right now, he's the vice chancellor of BITS Pilami and a friend of ours. And so, in this article, he's mentioned some of the things that I just pointed out. There are obviously, one is indulging in this scientific misconduct because there are some incentives. You gain something by indulging in scientific misconduct. What are the things that you gain? Today, one is that you either get a job, if you have a large number of publications during your doctoral period or your postdoctoral period, you can show those publications and get a job in a scientific institution. Or if you're already in a scientific institution, if you publish a large number of papers, you quickly get a promotion. So those are the kinds of incentives that an individual has, a scientist has, to be able to not indulging in or not practicing rigorous science and indulging in unethical science. So there is right now in India globally as a matter of fact, emphasis on the number of publications rather than quality, and some of these have been again pointed out by in the Hindu on the 27th of March 2025. The title of the article is, again, it's written by Gautam Desi Raju, who until recently was the Chancellor of the Bose Institute in Calcutta, is a very well-known scientist and is based in Bangalore, spent his lifetime as the Minister of Science, again, somebody whom I've known for a very long period of time. And the title of the article is, the issue is about quality of India's publication. Indeed, there is an emphasis on the number of publications rather than quality right now. So in order to increase the number of publications, you can publish your paper with a different title, the same paper with a different title in a different journal. So it increases your number of publications. So and there are other kinds of practices that one indulges in. And this is, like I said, you can get a faculty appointment, you can get a promotion if you have a larger number of publications. Today, in many institutions, they are not looking at the quality of the publication, they're mostly looking at how many papers you publish. So that becomes a hallmark of your scientific activity. But that hallmark of your scientific activity, in terms of the number of publications, may not actually have been obtained in a rigorous and ethical manner, and that's important for us to realize. There is a huge emphasis on impact factor of journals where you have published. H-index, again, these are some criteria by which your scientific output is judged. And this is primarily based on number of publications as opposed to quality of publications. Then, in terms of institutions are also in some ways promoting unethical practices and promoting non-rigorous science, primarily because if there are scientists in the institution who are practicing non-rigorous science and unethical science, the institutions, even if they get to know, are just keeping their eyes closed. Why? Because NIRF rankings are now based on the total number of publications by the scientists in that institution. So again, many of you would know what these NIRF rankings are. NIRF rankings are very important for an institution to get grants, to climb higher, if they climb higher, they get more students, the students are paying tuition fees and so on and so forth. So overall, the financial atmosphere of the institution looks up. So, and that's based on NIRF ranking, and NIRF ranking pays a huge emphasis on the number of publications by scientists in that particular institution. So it's not the individual scientists, but also the community of scientists that are in that institution. They are not pointing out the black sheep, primarily because even if they point out the black sheep to the director of the institution or to the dean of the institution, they may just keep quiet, because if they come down on such black sheep, they are probably going to come down on NIRF ranking. So there is this tacit approval of non-ethical, non-rigorous science even within an institution, something that's extremely sad. My last slide, what are the kinds of preventive measures that we can do? First of all, what we need to do is that it has to start early. Oftentimes it begins too late. What is rigorous science? What is ethical science? So we need to begin by teaching at the master's level, perhaps even at the bachelor's level, what constitutes scientific misconduct. We don't we don't openly, loudly speak about scientific misconduct. Don't point our fingers at people whose 28 publications have been retracted. We don't treat them as black sheep in society. We should treat them as black sheep in society. These people whose 28, I know the person personally, the person whose 20 publications have been retracted, the scientist has got all of the medals and all of the big awards of the government of India and other institutions because of this. And it's only after all of those were given, granted, that these papers have been retracted and these papers have come under fire. So the minimum that one can do is to take back those awards. Not done. We are just as a group of people, we are just too polite. We cannot be impolite and we cannot point our fingers at that sheep. That's the medium. We should learn to do that. And people who actually point fingers at the black sheep, they are pounced upon by other people, unfortunately. But as Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, because you are a group, it is important for you to realize that black sheep, if it is not pointed out by one individual, if it's pointed out by an organization, it probably will do a great good to the society if that's done, because an individual pointing out at a black sheep will probably will actually make other people point fingers at this person who's actually pointing out the black sheep. But if it's done by an organization, it's probably easier. This conflict of interest, there's personal, professional, and financial interest. There is a relationship between mentor and mentee. Oftentimes, I, as a PhD supervisor, will tell my student, look, I mean, this is the hypothesis that I'm trying to generate, that I'm trying to test, and I want data that provides support to this hypothesis. So I tell my student, generate data in such a way that it provides support to the hypothesis. It's completely wrong. So that's the mentee, the doctoral student, is afraid that if I don't do it, I will not get my PhD degree, and therefore this is what happens. That this way it escalates, and we should actually prevent that those kinds of things happening in an institution. So mentors must become much more responsible, and the relationship between mentor and mentee must improve from a dictatorial curve to a more collaborative curve. We need to have more collaborative research that will include collaborations with industry, because that collaborative research will mean that other people are also looking at me. I'm also looking at other people are also looking at me, and therefore I will hesitate to participate in unethical science. I will hesitate to participate in non-rigorous science. Again, the other things are a matter of detail, how we acquire data, the kind of laboratory tools that we use, the management of those laboratory instruments, the sharing of those instruments, data ownership, which has become very, very important. So today there is a huge push on, after you have generated the data, the journal will not even publish your paper that has analyzed those data unless you put the data in the public domain repository. Because if the data are in the public domain repository, other people can look at the data, they can analyze the data in their own way and see if they come to the same inference. So these are practices of good science. And again, very, very often the head of the department will insist that she or he will become an author on a paper where there is no contribution of the head of the department. This also is all pervasive in many Indian institutions. That must stop, because if that kind of guest authorship is also an unethical practice, but it's practiced very, very widely. The last point that I'll make is that we need to emphasize that a researcher is a respected member of the society. Hence, the researcher should behave with great responsibility, because that researcher has a huge impact on society because of their research and their mode of conduct of research. So this is absolutely important, and we need to tell every researcher early on that they are the people who teach the society, who lead the way for a good society, etc. And they should not do things that are harmful to society and at a later point of time will be viewed as a criminal in society. I will stop there, and I thank you very much again for asking me to give this talk. And again, giving these talks is something that we don't do on a very, very, very routinely. So it also makes makes us think what we should be telling, what we should be practicing, etc. And this was a great learning experience also for me, even though I teach the methodology of science and the ethics of science at the master's level, but still these things crop up in your own mind when you're asked to give a public lecture. So I thank the Parishad and the President and the General Secretary for having called me over to give this talk, and I thank you for your